This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you for joining us for this first edition of CBN NewsWatch. Lots to get to today. A shocker in Israel as the defense minister resigns over a ceasefire agreement with Hamas. And his resignation could lead to early elections in the Jewish state. Here at home, the death toll continues to climb in the tragic California wildfires. Now, more than 50 are dead. And the Trump administration is trying for peace with North Korea. But a new analysis shows the North has secret missile bases. Plus, could the U.S. face an Islamic terrorist threat from an unexpected location, Canada? All those stories and more are ahead in this half hour of CBN Newswatch. We want to begin, though, with Israel. Its defense minister resigned today over a ceasefire agreement yesterday after Hamas unleashed the worst attack in Israel in years. But the political fallout from the ceasefire could be huge for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In his resignation, Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman called the ceasefire a surrender to terror. The move could lead to the collapse of Netanyahu's government and force early elections. Hamas and other terror groups launched some 460 rockets at Israel over a 24-hour period. Israel responded with some 150 airstrikes on military targets in Gaza. Addressing the UN, Israel's representative Danny Danon played the red alert sign that Israelis hear.
We will continue to take any measure necessary to protect our people. Regarding the future, our approach is very clear. If it will not be quiet in Israel, it will not be quiet in Gaza. And I think the Hamas leaders know exactly what are the capabilities of the Israeli IDF, and they know we can get to them even if they hide beneath tunnels and beneath hospitals.
Israelis and Gazans had different reactions to the ceasefire. Gazans mounted a huge victory rally in the streets, but Israelis in that area was attacked were furious, saying they're being treated like second-class citizens. And you can see joining us now is CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell with more on this story. So, Chris, how could the resignation of Israel's defense minister lead to early elections? And could those elections throw Benjamin Netanyahu out of office?
Well, Ephraim, that certainly is a potential, and it's really been quite a roller coaster here in the last 24, 48 hours. We went from the brink of war now to the possible collapse of the Benjamin Netanyahu government. It's really a question of math, Ephraim. Right now, Netanyahu's government has 66 seats. Lieberman coming out of the government takes his 5 seats. That goes down to 61 seats out of the 120-seat Knesset. So they really has the slimmest of margins. Netanyahu has been threatening, actually, that he could go to new elections. He can call elections if he will. And right now, previous to the conflict with Hamas in the last few days, polls look very good for him, but I don't know what's going to happen after this latest ceasefire. Lieberman's contention is really a microcosm of really the debate within Israel right now, whether or not it was a surrender to terrorism by having the ceasefire.
So why do you think there was a ceasefire, Chris, instead of war?
Well, I think the calculations, it was a military calculations. I think the heads of the IDF, the Shin Bet, the Mossad was saying, don't go to war right now. It's too messy. I think the main question about Gaza, Ephraim, is what happens if you go in militarily, if you defeat Hamas? Who's going to rule Hamas after that? Certainly Israel doesn't want to do that. Egypt doesn't want to do that. The Palestinian Authority doesn't want to do that. So really, that's the main question with Gaza. So sometimes the calculation is let's live with a ceasefire temporarily and just manage the situation and try to actually take over Gaza militarily.
We know you've been following this attack throughout the last few days. Can you tell us what it was like to be there in that apartment that took a direct hit?
Yeah, we were there. We had a story on that yesterday, and we were there in the very kitchen where they took a direct hit, and it really does make it personal. When you see kitchen cupboards filled with cookies, when you see a kitchen table that was destroyed, knowing that 24 hours before that, somebody was sitting there, and actually, tragically, they lost their lives. 2 women were seriously injured. When we were there, the neighbor next door was collecting her belongings, and we found out all the toys of her children were destroyed in that attack. If you look through the whole building, almost the whole building is uninhabitable right now because the concussion really destroyed many of the things in that building. So really took it to a personal level. When you hear somebody died, but when you see actually that site, we actually saw blood on the floor as well. It makes it much more personal.
Indeed. Tell us what it's like for Israelis living close to the border. Why do they call themselves second-class citizens?
Well, I'll give you an example, Ephraim. When we were down there for several hours, and we realized at any time there could be a rocket attack. We drove without our seatbelts because we knew that if we had to stop, we had to get out quickly, lay beside the car. Imagine doing that for 15 years. That's what some of these people in the south of Israel have been living with. And that's why they call themselves second-class citizens, because they don't believe that the government right now is taking care of them and giving them the security they feel they deserve. And it goes back to that political calculation of Netanyahu. You know, does he go in militarily, take over Gaza? Right now, his calculation is no. But certainly that leaves these citizens in southern Israel, more than 1 million, under the threat of rocket attack at any time.
All right, Chris Mitchell, thank you so much for that report from Jerusalem. Stay safe. We appreciate you following this story for us.
Thanks, Ephraim.
The death toll for the wildfires burning in Northern California's Camp Fire has risen to 48 as of Tuesday night. The remains of 6 were found earlier yesterday, and 2 other deaths in the state bring the total killed in the wildfires to 50. The Camp Fire has scorched some 130,000 acres and is 35% contained. Thousands of firefighters have been battling the blazes, which have become the deadliest and costliest in the state's history. Hundreds of people unaccounted for, and many are desperately searching for their loved ones. Friends and relatives of the missing have been calling hospitals, shelters, even the coroner's office.
I think that there's hope, but also we have to prepare ourselves for the worst.
Details about those who perished are starting to emerge, among them a musician, a man who refurbished tires, and a loving father whom friends affectionately called Zeus. Troubling story. Reporter Charlene Aaron joins us now with more on these deadly wildfires we've been following for days. So what else have you learned about these fires?
Actually, there are 3 fires burning right now, Ephraim. It's absolutely amazing. There's the Camp Fire that we're hearing a whole lot about right now. Firefighters are literally holding the containment line, trying to keep it from spreading. It is 35% contained, so we're just continuing to pray. There's also that fire in the Woolsey area, but there's also a fire in the Ventura area, and the firefighters are using a bulldozer to try to keep those from spreading. It's amazing. 3 fires all at once.
I tell you, all at once. What can you tell us about the victims who are now being identified?
You know, this is really sad when you're beginning to see more details about the victims. I want to just read the names of 3 that have been released, and they've been identified as 65-year-old Ernie Foss of Paradise. We know that Paradise was sort of ground zero for that campfire, and he died alongside his dog. He was bedridden, he was on oxygen, and so he perished in that fire with his dog. 77-year-old Carl Wiley of Maglia also perished, and 48-year-old Jesus. His friends called him called him Zeus, but he also passed away. But it's just so sad as you're seeing the faces and the families who are now going to be affected as the victims are identified.
Indeed. Many people are still in shelters. What can you tell us about
nearly
that?
2,000 people. When you think about it, nearly 8,000 structures totally destroyed. So that's a lot of people. Nearly 2,000 people still in shelters. A lot of work needs to be done. They're going to need a lot of help.
Absolutely. Let's continue to pray for them indeed.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Here now is a look at some of the other major stories we're following for you today inside the CBN newsroom. President Donald Trump is looking to replace some members of his administration, but it's unclear who's going and who is staying. Homeland Security Secretary Kristen Nielsen was thought to be out, but will likely remain due to no obvious successor. President Trump also discussing replacing White House Chief of Staff John Kelly with Vice President Mike Pence's Chief of Staff Nick Ayers. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross and Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke could also be up for replacement. Security experts say Google has been hit by the worst ever internet hijack in the company's history. The London Daily Mail reports data belonging to users across the globe was intercepted by servers in Nigeria, China, and Russia. Experts suggest the hack was a war game experiment, saying an even bigger attack may be coming. Google is downplaying Monday's incident, but the paper reports the company is under increasing pressure to protect users after a recent string of high-profile data leaks. Asia Bibi has still not been allowed to leave Pakistan. The Christian woman was acquitted from charges of blasphemy against Islam last month. Her life remains at risk as radical Islamists have called for her death in an uproar of protest. More than 230 parliamentarians from various countries have signed a letter to Pakistan's Prime Minister asking for Bibi and her family to be granted asylum. And you can find more on this story and others throughout the day at cbnnews.com. Coming up, the Trump administration has been trying to establish peaceful relations with North Korea, but now it appears the North has a large number of hidden missile bases. We're going to have the latest on that story when we come back. While the White House is pushing for peace with North Korea, a new report reveals the regime may have as many as 20 hidden missile bases within the country. Amber Strong brings us this look at that report and the response from Washington.
It's the latest chapter in an ongoing saga between the U.S. and North Korea, with a new report revealing at least 13 hidden missile bases within the country. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, those hidden bases are capable of launching intercontinental ballistic and short-range missiles. Since their Singapore summit, the president has been optimistic about the progress with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un.
The sanctions are on. The missiles have stopped. The rockets have stopped. The hostages are home. The great heroes have been coming home.
That view continued Wednesday when, in a tweet, Mr. Trump called the report of additional bases nothing new. Most foreign policy experts agree this isn't really a surprise.
If you go back to January 1st of this year, Kim Jong-un did a speech that he does every year. And basically, he declared that North Korea would mass produce nuclear warheads and missiles. That's what he's doing.
So far, the administration isn't budging.
President Trump's made his position very clear. No economic relief until we have achieved our ultimate objective.
It's a precarious game of tug of war.
The North Koreans want all the sanctions lifted, or at least a lot of them, before they start rolling back their nuclear weapons and missile programs. The challenge is the United States wants the exact opposite. The question is, who goes first?
It's a question many in the administration may feel they've already answered, with the president making the first move by attending that historic summit. Now many believe it's time for Kim to make the second move. Amber Strong, CBN News in Washington.
Up next, a new Islamic terrorist threat to the United States may be developing from a completely unexpected location. Canada. How could that happen? We're going to bring you the story right after this. Despite some recent disagreements over trade, the U.S. and Canada have historically had a great relationship, but that could change if our northern neighbor doesn't stop its policy of welcoming Islamic extremists. As Dale Hurd reports, new evidence suggests Canada is turning into a terrorist base that could threaten America.
The U.S. and Canada share the longest undefended border in the world. There hasn't been a reason to defend it because there hasn't been a serious threat from either country in a couple hundred years. There is now. Canada is today the happy home of thousands of radical Islamists, ex-ISIS fighters, and the Muslim Brotherhood. Their numbers continue to grow, and they've infiltrated the Canadian government on several levels. Many Americans assume that all is peaceful and well with their northern neighbor. But security experts here warn that by welcoming radical Islamists, Canada now presents a danger to the United States. Terrorism expert David Harris, who worked for CSIS, Canada's spy agency, told us a major attack on the United States by Muslim extremists based in Canada is only a matter of time.
Many years ago, I suggested that many of the Islamist extremists might regard Canada as an aircraft carrier from which to maintain operations against the United States.
Canada is becoming a foundational sort of place for Islamists of all stripes, including the Iranians, by the way.
Thomas Quiggin is one of the authors of Submission, The Danger of Political Islam to Canada, with a warning to America. He says Canada is in denial over the terror threat it's created for itself and the United States. And the denier-in-chief is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who welcomed returning ISIS fighters back to Canada, saying they would be a powerful voice.
He's actually said in our parliament, sort of like out loud on the public record, that if you were opposed to ISIS fighters returning to Canada, it is because you're Islamophobic. In other words, it's not them that's the issue. It's your opposing their return makes you Islamophobic, it makes you racist.
I think there's the idea that, well, we need to welcome everyone because everyone's wonderful, so kumbaya.
Toronto Sun columnist and XM Sirius Canada host Anthony Furey.
Heavens, this notion that ISIS fighters are somehow deserving of kind of a respect and a cultural accommodation just as much as anyone else is nonsense.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello, my friends.
This is Prime Minister Trudeau sending an official greeting to Canada's annual Reviving the Islamic Spirit Convention, which he attended as a member of Parliament even after news reports the event was linked to a group that has funded Hamas.
This is also about celebrating our shared beliefs in justice, fairness, equality of opportunity, and acceptance.
And it was quite startling for people to say, do you know who you're talking to? And why would you say that you share their values when their values are anti-democratic, anti-women's rights, pro-slavery, pro-stoning of women? I mean, the stuff that's on some of their websites here in Canada is startling.
There have been lone wolf attacks on the U.S. from Canadian Muslim terrorists ever since the Quebec-based Millennial bomber tried to cross the border to blow up LAX in 1999. But the Islamist threat to Canada has been played down. July's attack on the Danforth in Toronto, where 2 women were killed and 13 injured, has been treated by the government and the media as only a mental health and gun control issue. Furey thinks the police are covering something up.
There's been a total cone of silence around the Danforth shooting story. I wrote a feature where I found out that the family statement, which said mental illness, nothing to see here, that had actually been sort of co-authored and put together by a spin doctor and also a Muslim community activist.
Much of Canada's mainstream media seems to stand with the Islamist. The Toronto Star announced it was no longer using the name the Islamic State because something so barbaric could not be Islamic. Parliament passed the notorious M103 anti-Islamophobia motion last year. Critics call it a government attempt to silence any criticism of Islamists in Canada. The government's welcome mat is not lost on the host of this Canadian Muslim program on the internet.
But of course, all of us take it for granted in Canada.
You see, Alhamdulillah, Canada has given us his blessings. Alhamdulillah.
Canada
is your country.
Islam is today the fastest growing religion in Canada. And Montreal-based terrorism expert Marc Labouie says the demographic change because of immigration from the Islamic world is not only profound, but dangerous.
I claim that the vast majority of Sunni-based Islamic institutions in the province of Quebec and also in Canada are Islamist.
Labouie says Islamists have infiltrated Canada's government and its security services, in some cases at the invitation of the government.
Police forces such as Ottawa, where they have visited radical preachers in order to recruit them to join the police force at some point or another.
But the Canadian government has done more than welcome dangerous Islamists. Quiggin accuses it of funding terrorism through its financial support of some Muslim groups. And if terrorists based here attack the U.S., he won't be surprised.
In the past, I think Canada would have had a defense. We could say, look, we tried to get this stuff stopped, but we failed. But if it happens this time, we won't have that defense.
The problem is so advanced, the government agencies in charge of our national security are so compromised that it will be very, very difficult to be able to turn things around.
Dale Hurd, CBN News, reporting from Ottawa and Toronto.
And still to come, why some scientists believe we could be headed for an extremely cold winter because of the sun. We're going to have that story and explain when we come back. And welcome back to this Wednesday edition of CBN NewsWatch. Scientists say this winter could bring record cold, and it's all because of a lack of sunspots. Dr. Tony Phillips with spaceweather.com says there's been practically no sunspots in 2018, and that's causing the Earth's upper atmosphere to cool and even shrink. Ice Age Now reports one NASA scientist says that if the trend continues, we could begin seeing record cold temperatures in just a matter of months. Right now, it is time for your Wednesday word, and today's word is faith. Consider this. Faith is actually vision. It is your ability to see God's picture more clearly than seeing those uncomfortable circumstances. Faith sees the invisible and expects the impossible. But most importantly, above all else, faith pleases God. His word clearly says, without faith, it is impossible to please Him. So hold fast to your faith this Wednesday and know that God is indeed in control, regardless of what the situation may look like. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Thank you so much for watching. And remember that coming up in our next half hour, interview with Charlotte Pence, the daughter of Vice President Pence. And remember that you can always find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing us. The address, newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can reach out and touch us anytime on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
And welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. In our second half hour, our conversation with Charlotte Pence, the daughter of Vice President Mike Pence, about her faith and her family and the journey from Indiana to Washington. Plus, a new book about President Donald Trump, written for a different audience, children. But first, here's a review of some of our top stories today. Israel could see new elections soon after its defense minister resigned today over a ceasefire agreement with Hamas following the worst attack on Israel in years. Avigdor Lieberman calls the agreement a surrender to terror. The move could lead to the collapse of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. The death toll for the wildfires burning in Northern California's Camp Fire has risen to 48 as of Tuesday night. The remains of 6 were found early Tuesday, and 2 other deaths in the state bring the total killed in the wildfires to 50. The Camp Fire has scorched some 130,000 acres and is 35% contained. Thousands of firefighters have been battling the blazes, which have become the deadliest and costliest in the state's history. Hundreds of people are unaccounted for, and many are desperately searching for their loved ones. Here's now a look at some of the other major stories we're following for you right now in the CBN newsroom. President Donald Trump is looking to replace some members of his administration, but it's not clear exactly who. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen was thought to be out, but may likely remain because there is no obvious successor. President Trump is also discussing replacing White House Chief of Staff John Kelly with Vice President Mike Pence's Chief of Staff Nick Ayers. The president could also replace Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross and Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke. Security experts say Google has been hit by the worst ever internet hijacking in its history. The London Daily Mail reports servers in Nigeria, China, and Russia intercepted data belonging to users across the globe. Experts suggest the hack was a war game experiment, saying an even bigger attack may be coming. Google is downplaying Monday's incident, but the newspaper reports the company is under increasing pressure to protect users after a recent string of high-profile data leaks. Asia Bibi has still not been allowed to leave Pakistan. The Christian woman was acquitted from blasphemy charges against Islam last month. Her life remains at risk as radical Islamists have called for her death in an uproar of protest. More than 230 parliamentarians from various countries have signed a letter to Pakistan's prime minister asking for Bibi and her family to be granted asylum. You can find more on these stories and others throughout the day at cbnnews.com. CNN is suing the Trump administration, demanding White House press credentials be returned to its correspondent Jim Acosta. The White House suspended his press pass last week following a heated exchange between Acosta and the president during a news conference. After answering several questions from Acosta, the president chastised him and told him to sit down. Acosta then refused and held onto the microphone as the White House intern tried to take it. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says the White House will vigorously defend against the lawsuit. I spoke to CBN's senior Washington correspondent Jennifer Wishon about this lawsuit. So, Jennifer, you've covered the White House for CBN News for many years. What's CNN's argument here?
Well, Ephraim, CNN is suing President Trump, his chief of staff, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, and a number of other White House officials. They say that by revoking Jim Acosta's press pass, that the White House has violated his constitutional rights to freedom of the press and due process. They are also asking for an immediate restraining order so that his press pass can be restored and he can return to the White House while the courts are hammering this out. Of course, CNN has to stand behind its correspondent. The White House Correspondents Association, which advocates for access on behalf of the White House press corps, is also standing behind him. The White House says they're going to fight this. They believe that this is their right to do so if they see fit.
So is it common for the White House to suspend press passes?
Ephraim, I am not aware of this ever happening. I think that it happened during an episode of West Wing, if you've ever seen that show. I've never heard of this happening, certainly not while I've been covering the White House. But let's be clear, White Houses issue hard passes to reporters that regularly cover the White House, and certainly administrations can play with that. It can take longer for certain correspondents to get their hard passes than others. I saw that play out during the Obama administration and the Trump administration. So they realize that they wield some power when it comes to the press pass.
What reaction are you hearing to this move in Washington from reporters to the Trump administration?
Well, I think that there's a general consensus that this is dangerous. We know throughout history, presidents do things that are wrong. Presidents do things that sometimes are illegal, and it's important to have a free press to cover that. That's one of the things that makes America unique. That's one of the reasons there's freedom of the press in the U.S. Constitution. We should be able to cover the president without fear of reprisal. However, I think that there's also some recognition that reporters need to not play the victim so much with this administration. You know, the Trump administration has turned the press shop on its head. They have shaken things up as promised, and it's taken a while for the press corps to get used to that, this new reality. There's still some growing pains, but I think it's important for reporters to remember that the story's not about them, that there shouldn't be such grandstanding, that you have to respect the office as much as you want the president to respect the press.
Do you think President Trump and the mainstream media will have, at some point, a more civil relationship?
I don't think so, Ephraim. I don't think that is in the future for these two bodies. But, you know, there should be a relationship between the press and the president. Should not have a cozy relationship. I should say it that way. It's important for the press to ask critical questions of the president. And of course, there's some days that presidents want to talk to the press and some days that they don't. But that's the way that it should be. And but I think the president is going to continue pointing out where he thinks that coverage is unfair. And I'm sure that the press is going to keep trying to figure out this president. But good luck with that.
Good luck indeed. Jennifer Wishon covering this for us from Washington. We appreciate your insight into this story.
Thank you, Ephraim.
Coming up, life lessons from the daughter of the vice president. Charlotte Pence traces her family's journey from Indiana to Washington, D.C. So don't go away. White House officials often write books about their lives and their time in Washington, and sometimes so do their family members. 25-year-old Charlotte Pence, the daughter of Vice President Mike Pence, recently released a new book called Where You Go, Life Lessons from My Father. Wendy Griffith sat down with the young author who opened up about her faith and her family.
I love this cover. I couldn't stop looking at the cover because I'm a daddy's girl too. And here you are about what, 4, 5?
Yeah, I think I'm about 5 there.
Okay, and you got to tell me this story. I love this just blesses my heart. Where were you guys?
Yeah, so that was taken on Sanibel Island in Florida. And so that was kind of a really kind of a special place for our family and a vacation spot we've gone back to over the years. And so when the publisher asked me for a picture of my dad and me, I couldn't really think of one. And then it just occurred to me one day I had the perfect picture.
Yeah. So are you a daddy's girl?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So Where You Go, this is a reference to the book of Ruth, to a scripture in the book of Ruth, one of my favorite all-time books in the Bible. Why this reference?
Yeah. So it comes from Ruth 1:16, which, as you know, is when Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi is telling her to leave her after her husband has died, and Ruth basically says, "No, where you go, I will go." And so I think that, when I was thinking of a title for this book, that just kind of summed up our family and how we do things. And
because you had to move so much.
We had to move so much, and physically, and I think just also, emotionally and mentally, just going with you wherever you are in your journey is something that we really try to do.
Your dad said something to you once that you said,
that was really profound? Something about everything's changing, or
Yeah, that was the night that he was elected to governor, actually. And he said to me when he was like going up to bed, everything has changed and nothing has changed. And what he meant by that was that, everything has changed in our life that we can kind of see. And, but, our relationships haven't changed and our faith hasn't changed. And, we're still going to be this strong unit.
Your dad is known for his faith, for being that solid rock that, when he gets up to speak, is he always that calm? He's like this sea of tranquility. Is he always like that?
He is. And, he's just somebody that I can always go to for advice. And I know my siblings can too. And even if we want to discuss something with him that we might not agree about, he always accepts it with just such grace and kindness and really wants to hear our perspectives.
Well, the subtitle is Life Lessons from My Father. So you got to give us some. What are some of the most amazing life lessons that your dad has given you?
Yeah, one of the lessons I think that's kind of one of my favorite is he tells me to speak my dreams. It's a phrase that he says a lot. And he said it on the campaign trail a little bit, when people would come up to him and say that they were interested in maybe going into politics, but they were a little bit timid about it at first. He would always say, no, speak your dreams. That's the first step.
The power of life and death is in the tongue.
Exactly.
You will have the fruit of your lips. So he's basically referencing the Bible.
Yes, he does that a lot.
So maybe you don't want to do it like in a crowd, maybe like, but I do that too. You have to. The Bible says there's power in that.
Right.
And what I loved about your book is you talked about, you always had the gift of writing. Your dad would always say, you're a writer. He would just speak that over you.
Yes.
You pursued that in college. You had a double major, or it was creative writing and
and screenwriting.
Which would scare most parents. They'd be like, "How is she going to put food on the? How's she going to feed herself?" But yet they supported that.
Absolutely.
And that made all the difference.
Yeah, they really did. My dad wrote the foreword for this book, and so he always, says that he always saw me as a writer. And so even when times, came about that I didn't really think of myself as a writer, or, I was kind of afraid of following that dream, he and my mom were always encouraging me. And I think that, speaking your dreams to other people is just as important as speaking their dreams to them and telling them and encouraging them to do it.
Absolutely. And this is your second book.
Yes.
And I believe it says New York Times best-selling author.
Yes.
Which is not bad.
Thank you.
Which is fabulous, by the way. And now you're at Harvard Divinity School.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm studying for a master's in theological studies and kind of focusing on religion and literature. So I want to write about faith topics and kind of facilitate conversations about faith in some way.
Wow.
Yeah.
And of course, we don't have time to talk about all the fun you had on the campaign trail, but we know that was well, why not? Let's talk about it. Nobody's giving me a time cue. You took some time out between college and going to Harvard to be there on the campaign trail with your dad and your mom, who you talk about very much in the book because you talk about them being like the unit.
Yes.
What was that like, just being out there? Your dad says, Donald Trump has selected me to be his running mate.
Right.
Were you freaking out, or was this was just, you expected it?
I didn't expect it, but for some reason, I just had a lot of peace about it from the very beginning, even when it was a possibility that we were kind of talking about. And, you kind of find out actually about that very soon after the decision is made, and then you go to the convention. So, you have like a week and a half or something in between those two things. And so it's kind of crazy. It's a big time of transition, but we just had a lot of peace about it as a family. And, I think that is just a testament to my parents and just, their strength and how they've raised us.
Yeah. Well, we...
Still ahead, another new book, this one about President Trump for children. We're going to have that story when we come back. The writing of best-selling author Eric Metaxas includes both funny and serious angles for children as well as adults. His latest book about President Trump embodies all of those qualities. Our Jennifer Wishon recently met up with him in New York City.
We caught up with Eric Metaxas while he was hosting his radio show.
It's kind of scary to me, the power
that Facebook has.
With his new book, Donald Drains the Swamp, proudly displayed beside his microphone. It's a tale about a character called Donald the Caveman, based on a true story.
So Eric.
Yes.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther.
Yeah.
Donald the Caveman.
Yes.
It's quite a progression.
Thank you. It's not a progression. It's either a regression or nothing at all. It's kind of a funny thing. I'm very eclectic. I've always been that way.
He's not kidding. The conservative Christian has written critically acclaimed biographies, more than 30 children's books, even scripts for the popular cartoon VeggieTales. And his latest book is a mashup of political humor, serious lessons about liberty, and the good things Metaxas sees happening in America under this president.
This presidency, there's something about it. He has a folk hero quality. It's like an American folk hero. Who is this guy?
Do you see this as a children's book, or do you see it as a, it's good for everybody to read?
When I wrote this book originally, I was really thinking of a humor book for adults. A humor book about Donald the Caveman. He drains the swamp. And there's a lot of political humor in here that's specifically for adults. Kids aren't going to get it. But if you do it just right, you do it in a way that doesn't exclude kids. You do it in a way that's sweet and innocent. This book is not nasty, it's not mean, it's meant to be lighthearted and fun. There's also a blue bird that flits through the book. And as you know, birds like to tweet. So, make of it what you will. Why is it following Donald around? Well, that you can figure that out.
And to be fair, there's also a turtle in here who looks a lot like the Senate Majority Leader.
Well, to be really fair, and this is not a knock on turtles, but all turtles somehow end up looking like the Senate Majority Leader. It's not their fault. It's not his fault. It's just a quirk of nature.
So why did he portray the president as a caveman?
Sometimes we think he's a little bit of a caveman, this president, but he's our caveman. He's working for us. That's the key. He's working for us.
Well, I think the power of the Trump presidency is in its simplicity. The fact that he's driven so much by his gut, his boldness,
right.
That I think is portrayed here.
But that's exactly right. That's part of the issue of the caveman, right? The caveman is not self-conscious. He just does what he has to do. He clubs the animal, he eats it. There's something funny about that this president is so motivated by his gut, his instincts, that it is almost funny. You don't think of him he's the antithesis of Obama. Obama was paralyzed by overthinking things. It was kind of a Hamlet-like paralysis. He was unable to do anything, and you thought, is he even in the White House? Is Daddy home? What is going on? Do we have a president? This president, you sort of feel just the opposite.
Metaxas is on a mission to make Americans think. Along with his best-selling books, here in New York City, he hosts a lecture series called Socrates in the City, where he and his guests tackle big issues like God, science, and culture.
He understands why some voters, particularly Christians, may have to hold their noses when it comes to some of Trump's tactics.
Oh, listen, you have to understand, voting for Trump is not necessarily a vote for Trump. It's a vote for the people he's going to affect. God holds us accountable. He doesn't say, well, if you don't like this or you don't like the way he combs his hair, don't vote for him. If you don't vote for the person you think is going to do the best job, they may not be perfect, but the other person's going to get in. And I think that Christians, sometimes we feel like, well, I'm going to be really holy and I'm not going to get my hands dirty. I think God calls us to get our hands dirty. We're living in such divided times. We need to laugh. We need to be able to celebrate the good things that are happening. So that's why I wrote the book.
And this isn't Donald the Caveman's only adventure. Look for Donald Builds the Wall, even Donald Goes to Space, coming soon.
He hopes this latest book winds up under lots of Christmas trees this year, so more Americans better understand the importance of draining the swamp. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, New York City.
And thank you, Jennifer. The book is called Donald Drains the Swamp. It is available wherever books are sold. Still ahead, how CBN's Operation Blessing is helping to provide an education for children in Kenya. And welcome back. Operation Blessing is helping to provide education for children in Kenya. The Maasai tribe lives miles away from civilization, making it difficult for them to go to school. Operation Blessing stepped in and built a brand new school right in their village. In addition to education, the school guarantees each child receives a healthy meal and instruction in hygiene. Operation Blessing also brought learning supplies and created a safe water source. You can find more on Operation Blessing always by going to their website, ob.org. Time now for your Wednesday word, and today's word is this: faith. Consider this. Faith is vision. It is your ability to see God's picture more clearly than those uncomfortable circumstances that may surround you. Faith sees the invisible. It also expects the impossible. But most importantly, faith is what pleases God. The word says faith is required, and without faith, it is impossible to please Him. Walk in faith today, knowing that God is indeed able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that you could ever ask or think. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, the news continues 24/7 at cbnnews.com. There you can find exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about always. And we'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and talk to us on Facebook, on Twitter, as well as Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make this a wonderful Wednesday as well as a wonderful rest of the week. Goodbye, everybody, and God bless. Thank you so much for watching.